When we think of Black academia, our minds connect to an ideal of brilliant scholars developing their intelligence to elevate the Black collective. That ideal has been dead for a long time, and Black academia is in severe disarray. The 1960s saw a great awakening of Black consciousness in American universities. Black students radicalized by the Civil Rights Movement became thought leaders on newly desegregated college campuses and leaders in the campus protest movement sweeping America. They were influencing the political education and racial awareness of students. That was a direct threat to the American racial status quo, and steps were taken to neutralize that threat. The first step was derailing the message. White feminism worked to fragment unified Black struggle, separating the struggle of Black women from Black men with the idea that all women are oppressed by men and that all men are privileged, even though Black men were, and are, at the bottom of every American socioeconomic metric. The white-dominated LGBTQ movement did likewise, and both used Black proxies to infiltrate and fragment the Black Power movement on college campuses. The next step was to discredit mentors and community leaders who didn't come through the university system, and marginalizing Black-centered scholars. Coupled with the assassinations and imprisonment of Black Power movement leadership, the direction of Black intellectualism shifted from liberation to integration. We're 2 generations into this process, and it's worked brilliantly. You have Black academics using their credibility of their skin tone to parrot ideas and niche agendas that are detrimental to the Black collective, factor in the speed with which social media can disseminate misinformation to the public, and the result is uneducated Black masses and other groups being bullied into accepting the Black academic assimilationist party line. Anti-Black misandry is almost a prerequisite to advance as a Black academic, but more on that in a later video. People is dead. What we have now is a cadre of opportunists for whom Blackness is a Trojan horse to position themselves as the gatekeepers of Black thought. In truth, they are more dangerous than open enemies, because neither Black people or well-meaning white people can see them coming.
So, Ridge is already really good at the wallet and all the everyday carry stuff, but I was surprised with how much they were able to do with their first foray into tech. So this, a 10,000 milliamp hour battery that's already this small, is pretty clutch, but it's also pretty loaded. Built-in braided USB-C cable and lightning cable.
Black male graduates tend to drop out at a rate of about 70% in their first year. That's a small percentage that actually go to college, because across race, not everybody goes. Usually a fairly small percentage of people go. But out of that, at least in the California State University system, we know that a good number of them drop out by their first year. And this was astonishing to me when I first found it out. I mean, you knew it, and you had a sense of it, but I didn't have any numbers. And I attended a special conference for Black males within the CSU system, and they kind of dropped this rather matter-of-factly, and it kind of broke my heart.
If we're talking about earning potential and earning capacity, don't you think that completing a degree program is the key? If we're doing that, I'm not even the biggest fan of doing that, but if we're gonna do it, I'm just asking questions. I don't know.
According to the National Center for Education Statistics, only 36% of Black male students completed a bachelor's degree within 6 years, and 52% of Latino male students completed theirs within the same time. White males graduated at a rate of 63% in 6 years. Now that's important, right? According to the National Center for Education Statistics, 36% of Black male students completed a bachelor's degree within 6 years. Now, those are national numbers. So I gave you the CSU numbers as far as California. We looked over some of California's overall information as it pertains to Black males. But here we're looking at national numbers, 36%.
Okay. You know what I've come to believe? That men really underestimated women. that there was a kind of a culture of neglect or whatever, emotional neglect, intellectual neglect among, boys and men and whatever. But they were still able to succeed and outperform because the doors were closed to women.
Since 1976, Black men have half the degrees Black women have. It is what it is. Black men have found other ways to make money. But here's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just that they found other ways to make money. It's that we were pushed out of academics in K through 12. And we were forced to find other ways to make money.
And then the doors are open to women, right? The structure of the labor force, the structure of the economy shifts in a way that values knowledge work, that values the brain stuff, the typing stuff, the writing stuff, the orderly stuff, the paying attention and following instruction stuff. And the structure of the labor force is changing at the same time as these feminist movements are reaping real rewards. They're getting real wins. And so the way that you were treating boys and men, their approaches, and it stopped working. It stopped reaping dividends for them. And so it kind of gave them, this is just a theory, I'm just spitballing, like a learned helplessness.
It's not an accident that you have over 90% female teachers at some grade levels.
Right.
So this has a correlation to how students perform that nobody wants to talk about. And boys across race end up performing more poorly than girls. And in that, Black boys at the bottom of that list. So I don't have a problem. If Black men didn't want to go to college, that would be fine. But that's not what's happening. Black men are being pushed out. Black boys are being pushed out before they even get started. They tried to put my son in special ed in kindergarten.
And now we get into the modern era, and there's all of this momentum. Okay, there's this momentum around, girls, and girls can do anything, and there's support and cultural encouragement. But even while there's support and cultural encouragement, like the top is still men. The classrooms in higher education still predominated by men. The professors in higher education still predominated by men, but there's this cultural energy.
This is a breakdown of Black faculty in colleges.
Okay.
And the reason this is important is when we talk about, and I said this in my last show, I talked about how Black feminism is reproduced because what we see in the academy is an overwhelming number of girls and women that are going into higher education. And, I talked about this in terms of Grambling University. I talked about this in terms of Howard. But we could talk about predominantly white institutions as well. When it comes to Black folk going to school, we know that since 1976, Black men have half the degrees Black women have.
And women are making these networks and they're building up their own institutions of, informal and formal institutions of support around, yes, girls, women, do it, support.
Mm-hmm. One of the things you'll tend to find is Black women will set up businesses that primarily cater to each other.
Yes.
They will literally set up businesses where their primary customer is other Black women.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we know over 99% of Black women's businesses have one employee. So their focus is only on each other.
And so, and to a degree, there is that. I won't say, maybe it's neglect, maybe it's, maybe maybe they'll call it neglect or whatever. But there's not the similar push, because it's like, why would you need a push if you're already at the,
No, according to the only study I'm aware of on the actual numbers of Black faculty and staff, Black men are about 23,000 fewer in higher education. I want you guys to have that information, right? Anyway, so just to kind of put that out there, that speaks to why we see feminism so rapidly and rampantly spreading in higher education.
I don't work 80 hours a week anymore. I found an easy way to multiply my output. There was a time when real work, the work that moves the needle, never made it off my whiteboard. My days disappeared into email.
Like, why would you need a push if you're already everywhere, you know? And by the way, there's a difference. I feel differently about this when it comes to like the low income and the higher income. But even as Raj Chetty's work points out, upper income boys don't do great. I mean, you know, like, it's dicey for them too. It's dicey for the upper middle class Black boys.
Because it's not just that it's primarily girls that are going, it's also that those who are teaching them, especially if they're Black, are overwhelmingly women. And when you start to factor in their ideology, feminism translates much easier among that population. And you can see why you'll have Black male faculty that will acquiesce to the dominant feminist ideology because they are outnumbered.
Outnumbered, yeah.
If you try to get hired in a university, guess who's sitting on the hiring committee?
You know, there's this conversation about, well, you know, representation, they just need to see themselves. I mean, did the girls just, I mean, people pursued things when there was little to no representation since forever. I'm the child of a Black woman who got an engineering degree in the 70s. Well, she graduated in 1980, okay? What representation did that lady have? I don't know. Honestly, I do think that a lot of my personal experience really colors this. What representation did that lady have?
I don't have a problem. If Black men didn't want to go to college, that would be fine. But that's not what's happening. Black men are being pushed out. Black boys are being pushed out before they even get started. They tried to put my son in special ed in kindergarten.
Mine too.
Kindergarten. Yeah.
Mine too.
And this boy was reading 700-page Harry Potter books in the first and second grade.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted to put him in special ed. And they would have succeeded if I wasn't at the campus as often as I am, because I had more time than the average working Black family.
Why do Black men need so much support and help to do just about everything? Black women don't need that. You know, I've told y'all I'm just trying to stay out of this. I'm just trying to...
How many college programs have you seen publicized, supported, mainstream media, maybe with celebrity endorsement, focused specifically on Black male graduation? Don't worry, I'll wait.
You know, Bootstraps Kimberly is coming out. I'm so sorry. I know. My boyfriend voice is Bootstraps Kimberly.
Black men actually have more businesses, even though they're not credited for it, but we don't tend to get federal or philanthropic support.
God's working on me. God is working on me. Because there's just some... I don't know. Okay.
No, yeah, Black men tend to have trades. Okay.
From the context that I come from, saying that you want to date somebody with a degree is like saying you want to date somebody with a job. I mean, like, truly, it's like, it's as uncontroversial as saying I want to date somebody who goes to work, you know? Like,
We don't list our trade or our hustle or our independent self-employment work as a business.
Right.
Yeah, I do plumbing, I do drywall, I fix some houses. It's not a business, it's more like a hustle. But it's women listed as a business.
Women listed as a business, absolutely. But even when it is a business, or we acknowledge it as such, you don't often hear these black men say this is a black-owned business, or this is a black male-owned business.
Yeah.
And I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, my assumption is that we don't get any props for it being black male-owned. If it's black female-owned, it's celebrated.
Yeah. Celebrated, yeah. A black male-owned, it's almost like a kiss of death.
It's exactly, which provides no incentive for black men to want to go out there and scream to the heavens that we have a black-owned business.
Oh no!
If anything, you a lot of brothers just put their head down, keep pushing, do the work.
Yep.
And you'll notice that when you look at like the title of their business, if it's something completely void, it'd just be something that sounds real generic. Them brothers know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Because there's no benefit that they get for pointing it out.
I wouldn't date somebody who didn't have a degree. And it's fascinating that in these conversations, when women say that, like the bare minimum, like it only becomes controversial because there are so many more women who have degrees than men. And the conversation around this for so long has been about the deficits of the women, when in reality, it's actually a reflection of what's going on with the men.
The way this plays out, you got, what is it? Howard has 70% of its population black female.
Yeah.
When you have a preponderance of black girls and women going into higher education, and then a preponderance of those women who are primarily the faculty there. Yes, there was, at least in terms of 2011, there was a higher percentage of black males who were tenured. Right. Slightly higher. So you got 7,776 black males who are tenured, fully tenured, like myself. And then you have, I'm not, I'm associate, but anyway, then you have 6,681 black females. A lot of that, I think, has to do with child rearing.
Yeah.
Whatnot. But at the end of the day, and this is what feminists will focus on, there are more men that are tenured. That's what they'll tell you. But they won't tell you that there are over 20,000 more black professors, black female professors than men.
Like it is a problem that we wasted all this. We actually needed to be over here. Y'all were over in this Kool-Aid. We actually needed to be over in this Kool-Aid.
And when you factor that in with the percentage of black women and girls who are going to college as opposed to their men, now you have a preponderance of black women in a higher educational space.
Yeah.
That supposedly translates to white collar employment and even into politics. Right? How many politicians don't at least have a college degree? This is the jumping off point for being able to move in the white collar world. This is happening primarily amongst women and girls.
The debate about trade school versus a college degree is the dumbest shit in the world, you guys. It's the dumbest shit in the world.
Inevitably, whenever I talk about college, I know there tends to be a bevy of folks that like to come out and say, F college, just focus on blue collar careers. But the reality is there is no escaping this particular type of exclusion.
Look, in 2025, we are no longer entertaining dumb arguments as if they are not fucking stupid. It's the dumbest shit in the world. You know what I just read the other day? Do you know how many applications there were to the undergraduate degree program at the University of Pennsylvania? 70,000.
In every genre, for the most part, you tend to find the same numbers in a similar fashion. And I'm not saying this is exact across the board, but for the most part, you tend to find there to be a wall that impacts black male achievement. And there's always a few that are able to climb over that wall, and shout out to those brothers. But I want us to be careful You know, because I hear this from, and this happened last week on my Facebook page. There's always one or two cats that come up and say, well, I did it and it was easy for me. So, you know, I'll just need to step it up. And it's like,
be fearless. Change is good.
We have the whites and the others clamoring, fighting each other, clawing, disenfranchising people to get their kids into college, committing crimes, risking prison to get their kids into college.
look, man, I'm not saying this as somebody who didn't finish, who's lamenting about how I've been left behind. I did. I am one of the few that got through. And I'm saying it's bullshit. It shouldn't be this hard for
Hey. How's it going, everybody? Happy Saturday to all y'all. Shout out to you. For those of you who are joining super last minute, like, share, subscribe on the way in. Give me 1 second. I want to make sure. Did y'all hear everything that I just played? Okay. Okay, looks like I did. Okay, I wanted to make sure. Hey, what's going on, Blunt Girly? Good to see you. Good to see you. Okay, yeah, I definitely would love to collab. I don't know your email. So put your email in the comments if you want, or if you want to email me here, feel free to do so. Because yeah, I definitely would love to get together and talk all things just divestiture rhetoric. I also have been really wanted to talk a little bit more about just this whole colorism, futurism debate I've been seeing going on. I've been seeing some recent beef between the exoticals and the monoracial, single racial, black, whatever terms are being used. So anyways, yeah, hit me up if you want, or just let me know your email because I don't know what it is. Anyway, so just circling back, thank you guys for joining me. This is super last minute, but I've been wanting to cover off this topic for a while, particularly since I heard about this just heartbreaking situation about Trey Reed. So I'm going to try to get through this as much as possible, but today we are going to focus on a lot of information. And I wanted to start off this video with a topic that I addressed a few months ago. Y'all remember when, like clockwork, this whole conversation around Black men not being in college and Black men not leveling up with Black women and all this kind of different stuff, and why Black men need to be getting degrees. And it's just the same debate that evidently recycles every few years. So I did a breakdown between, what I heard Black feminists saying and then what I heard, Black masculinists saying, right? And so that's kind of what this back and forth, this comparison was between, the Kimberly Nicole Fosters, who's definitely Black feminist, and then obviously Dr. Hasan Johnson, who represents Black masculinism. But it's all around this idea of Black men in college and Black men supposedly not leveling up, and how they're not being seen in colleges, how they're not being able to, they're not basically reaching the upper echelons of education and the implications for that. So that's really what that particular debate was about. But I would argue that debate really is a reflection of a deeper issue that I believe is rarely addressed. And I've come to the conclusion after just my own research and having observed things in my own life, just anecdotally, personally, and even over the last few years, I've come to the conclusion that I really believe that Black masculinity is a threat. It's seen as a threat, and it is systematically targeted in ways that are uniquely distinctive from Black women. If you'd have told me this maybe, 5, 6, 7 years ago, I maybe would have looked at you a little sideways or just been confused by the whole topic. But the more I learn and the more I understand, the more I start to truly believe that it's true. It is true when Black men say that they are perceived as threats, that they are treated as threats, and that they are continuously painted under that narrative, like that they're not just making that stuff up. That's not just, something that they're crying victim, but there is countless evidence of this. And I believe that there is a deeper root. And that's kind of what I want to talk a little bit about today. Just some of the things that I've noticed. Now, again, for a lot of you guys, this is water under the bridge. If you're a Black man in America, you've known this since the age of like 6, probably. So this is not anything new to you. But I just kind of wanted to just piece together a lot of the different information that I've come across over my years of research, and then just over actually listening and hearing Black men, and which shows why I ultimately believe Black men are a threat, and why a empowered Black man or a empowered Black male community is one of the biggest threats to a power system that ultimately depends upon its subjugation to thrive. And so that's what we're going to look at today. Now, I want to start off by looking first at the whole Trey Reed situation. For those of you guys who are not aware, it's a gentleman over here in the right, in the suit. He looks, nice and well groomed and looks really professional. And unfortunately, he was recently found unalived on a tree. He was hung. Basically, he was hung. Now, the authorities are basically saying that it was supposedly he unalived himself by hanging himself off of a tree. I think that is just complete and total like baloney, honestly. But that is the official report. But without further ado, let me just share with you guys some of the reports that I've seen around this whole situation. And I'm going to share why this is all connected to what is just, to me, increasingly clear. And why Black men such as Trey Reed, not only do I see why they're targeted, but there's a history of Black men such as Trey Reed being targeted. And it all goes back down to this need to suppress Black masculinity, to suppress Black men, because when Black men as a collective succeed, again, that is going to be a threat to power systems that depend upon its subjugation, right? So let me see if I can find it right here. Okay, so this one right here, real quick, the whole situation with Trey Reed, it's the unaliving of a Black Delta State student found hanging in a tree. It said it was ruled a suicide. I am just so sorry. That is, to me, I think that's total and utter BS. Like, a Black man is not going out of his way to hang himself. Like, I don't believe anything about that. When I initially heard the report, I'm like, I just don't believe it. Especially when I understand where it's at. This happened in Mississippi. I think it's all, I think it's a lie. That's just me personally. But nevertheless, this is exactly what the reports are saying. Okay, here it says the death of 21-year-old Black student discovered hanging from a tree at the Delta State University in Mississippi has been ruled a suicide, police said Thursday. The body of the student, identified as Demartravian Trey Reed, was discovered by a faculty member around 7 a.m. on Monday, hanging from a tree near the pickleball courts on the Cleveland, Mississippi campus, according to the campus police department, right? So, I mean, that's the whole situation. He was found at 7 a.m. on Monday. It says the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's autopsy findings are consistent with the initial investigation, determining the cause of death to be hanging on the manner of death as suicide. So they're basically claiming that this man unalived hung himself to death. Like, I just don't believe that. Like, I don't believe, and I think if a man is going to go out of his way to unalive himself, it's not going to be by hanging himself on a tree. I don't believe that at all, especially when we consider just the history of not only this country, but think of that particular state, right? He's in Mississippi, and Mississippi has a long and dark history of Black men in particular being unalived, being lynched, being systematically targeted. Emmett Till, to my understanding, was his unaliving happened in Mississippi. So that's, there's obviously a dark history there, but nevertheless, so, the medical reports are saying, oh no, this Black man decided to hang himself. Like, okay. If you continue, there's all this thoughts and prayers, and then, there's the official report. The principal of the school is obviously leaning in. It says, okay, the school's president acknowledged this week that the incident has stoked tensions on campus and stirred up memories of a racist violence of the state's Jim Crow era history. Yeah. So again, like, it's in the state of Mississippi. That obviously is going to bring up a lot of tension, a lot of fears, if you understand the history of not only that nation, but that particular state, in the way that it has targeted, unfortunately, African Americans over the years. It says the school is about 50 miles from the river where in 1995, authorities discovered the mutilated body of Emmett Till, a 14-year-old Black child who was abducted by 2 white men after he was accused of whistling at a white woman. Yeah. So again, I mentioned the Emmett Till, where he was basically unalived, right? He was mutilated for something he didn't do. Evidence came out later on that it was all fabricated, and that is very much the case. Many of the lynchings or unalivings that happened towards Black men, oftentimes it was not based upon anything that was true. A lot of times it was just a reason that they needed to systematically target Black men. And again, that's because they were obviously Black men were and have been seen as a threat. And again, I'm saying this because for a lot of Black men, this is literally this by the time you're 5. If you grew up in the United States of America, you are completely aware of this. And so the information I'm going to share for many of you guys is not going to be anything new or cutting edge or surprising. But I think as a Black woman, and again, I'm doing a little side note here before I continue. I think as a Black woman, it's particularly important for us to know this because we're not taught this. We're oftentimes taught that, okay, the Black community as a collective, we're targeted, or, racism, yada, yada. And then obviously Black women are seen as like the double minority, so we're oftentimes seen as being a bigger threat or more subjugated to Black with comparison to Black men, or oftentimes told that Black men actually have more privileges than us. But we're not taught the ways in which Black men themselves are uniquely targeted, and it's it's one of the reasons is because we just don't talk about these things. We're not told about these things. We're not given information. We don't learn. And Black women, I don't think, ever really come to this understanding until they're in close relationship with Black men, until they listen to it, until they or have, I think, personal experience anecdotally and recognize that, like, hey, y'all are treated differently. Like, my husband has a completely different experience going to the grocery store than I do. He has a complete experience in general, walking, going to the mall, just going to grab milk, grabbing gas. Like, he has a completely different experience. And it's for no other reason than he's a tall, dark-skinned, muscular Black man that is going to be seen as a threat just for simply existing. I don't have those experiences. So again, I'm reiterating, these are things that Black men, I think, intrinsically already know. They experience this, even if there's not, the vocabulary or there's not a lot of scholarship behind it. I think Black men intrinsically know this, but I don't think that understanding is as prevalent among Black women. Now, over the last few months, you have Black women having more, quote, ninja moments, unquote, with a lot of the changes that have been happening in the government. And so I think Black women now are like, it's like cold water has been thrown in their face, and they're starting to recognize that the system is maybe not as affirming or as a soft place to land as they thought. So Black women are starting to wake up to this, but Black men have always known that they've been perceived as a threat. I just don't think the understanding of that has been as collective, honestly, as it needs to be. So that is what that's kind of what I want to talk a little bit more about. Okay. So you're going to get banned because you're getting on my nerves, and you are obviously reactive. And I pray that you do well, but you're not listening to anything that I'm saying. So you're going to be dealt with. So let's continue with this whole topic of what's going on with Trey Reed. Where'd it go, you guys? Okay. Sorry guys, bear with me. Okay, so we're just continuing again. This happened over the last week. This was a Black man who was unalived. To my understanding, since then there's been at least one or two. There was, I think they said, a white man who was found unalived or hanging from a tree. So that's a whole other conversation for another day. But today I wanted to focus specifically on Black masculinity, and there's obviously a long history of Black men being targeted through lynching. So with this example, again, they're talking about how they're saying it was a suicide. They're saying that it was self-inflicted. Reports were saying that they didn't find any broken bones. They didn't find anything. The official investigations are saying that about this young college student. Here it says, meanwhile, officials confirmed to ABC News that a second man. Okay, yeah. So that's what I'm talking about. There was a second man who was unalived. And let me continue. Let's see if there's anything else. So this is the college where he was found hung from a tree. This 21-year-old Delta State University student. And again, the medical examiners are basically saying that there's no foul play. He unalived himself. I mean, it's pretty consistent. Now, the Black community's response, such as NAACP, they're saying that they are obviously incredibly skeptical of the initial findings in the police investigation. This family alone is not in agreement with it. And it says Reed's family has retained National Civil Rights Attorney Benjamin Crump to represent them. So the family is pushing actually for an independent investigation. And so last I saw, Colin Kaepernick is going to help. It says, Colin Kaepernick he's pushing for an independent autopsy and is going to help support, I think, through his Know Your Rights camp. What is it yet? What does it say? Know Your Rights Camp Autopsy Initiative. And he's going to basically cover the cost of a second autopsy for Trey Reed. So, again, you have the official reports, you have the police investigators, you have the medical examiners saying, oh, no foul play here, this is a suicide. But then you have the family, you have NAACP, and ultimately the Black community that it's saying, we don't believe anything that you're saying. We want to do an independent investigation. Now, obviously, why is there this tension? If you understand the history of Mississippi, just Mississippi, period, you understand that that state is absolutely no, they are not new to racial violence and racial discrimination. I saw some unofficial reports that were saying that Trey Reed had, issues previously with racism and had previous people who were bullying him or just treating him wrong because he was a Black male. So, but again, those are unofficial findings. I can't say that it's whether or not it's true or false. But what we do know for sure is that you have the family that is not in agreement with the public statement or not in agreement with the initial autopsy and definitely believe that there's some foul play here. How often are Black men going out of their way to hang themselves? Even if there is going to be a suicide, are they really going to go on a college campus at early in the morning and hang themselves from a tree like that? Like that just so nobody who's Black is listening to this believes this. Okay. So, but again, so why is this important? Or what is the connection between a Trey Reed and what, the threat of Black men being feared? You have this young 21-year-old college student. He's going to college. He's getting his higher education. He's doing the things that Black women oftentimes claim Black men don't do. He's getting his education. He's putting himself in a position where he can get a white collar job. Why would somebody like him, in my opinion, be feared? And now I want to briefly just turn your attention to just American history. And if we understand the history behind just lynchings, the long history of lynchings and how Black men, specifically successful, prosperous, and prominent Black men, were generally the targets of lynchings. There's this stereotype that the Black men who were lynched were, usually predators. They were people who were sexually promiscuous or who were dangerous to society. But in reality, the Black men historically who were generally targeted and unalived and lynched were oftentimes the ones who were leading the charge as far as economic change and leading the charge as far as just overall improving the community, right? So again, it says, Black men who were lynched were successful, prosperous, and prominent community members. Their myths of Black men as sexual predators were used as a common pretext for lynchings. Civil rights activist Ida B. Wells Barnett exposed the economic motivations behind these acts of racial terrorism. So again, the successful Black men were oftentimes the ones who were targeted because they posed economic threat. It says, again, successful lynchings of successful Black men serve to destroy economic competition and suppress Black economic progress. This was part of a larger systematic effort to maintain white economic dominance and ensure a cheap Black labor force. So I'm reading right now just some information, but I want to draw a connection between the reason somebody like Trey Reed, I believe, would be a threat is because he represents a long line of successful Black men who were actually seen as a threat, or who have been perceived as a threat to a system that depends upon their subjugation. So here's some examples, right? The People's Grocery lynching, 1892 in Memphis, Tennessee. 3 Black co-owners of the People's Grocery, Thomas Moss, Calvin McDowell, and Will Stewart were lynched by a white mob. Actually, let me see if I can pull this up. Give you guys some visual examples here. Give me 1 second. Let's see if they even have that. You guys bear with me. See if I can pull up some visual examples here, because I know some of you guys are more visual, but what I'm wanting to articulate is that there is let's see right here, Thomas, right here. Yeah, okay. So here's one example right here. I'm just going to show you real quick. Stop screen. We have, let me see right here. The people's grocer, right? So again, I said in Memphis, Tennessee, 3 Black co-owners of the People's Grocery, Thomas Moss, Calvin McDowell, and Will Stewart, were lynched by a white mob. The men were successful entrepreneurs who had opened a store that directly competed with a white-owned business. The white grocer, angered by the competition, instigated a harassment campaign that escalated into violence, resulting in the unaliving of these 3 men. Right? So again, why were they a threat? They were economic competition. They were economic competition. At a time, in 1892, at a time, Black men were very much connected to a labor force. That's just one of many examples. You go to 1916, South Carolina, a white mob lynched Anthony P. Crawford, a successful Black farmer and landowner. The murder occurred after he dared to argue with a white merchant over the price of cottonseed. Following the lynching, white residents seized Crawford's property and his family was forced to flee the area. Right? That's one example. Obviously, the Tulsa, Oklahoma massacre in 1921. Again, a prospering Black neighborhood of Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, was known as the Black Wall Street due to its numerous successful businesses. But in 1921, a mob attacked the community, destroying over 1,000 homes and businesses and killing an estimated 300 people. And y'all remember when it was just that case, I think, was it a few years ago? Within the last 5 years, you had survivors of the Tulsa, Oklahoma, who were fighting for reparations, and it was denied. Unfortunately, it was denied. But this is documented. This is like state documented, all of these things. And yet, even more recently, you had survivors of Tulsa, Oklahoma, the massacre, who talked about it, who sharing it. There's plenty of evidence, and they unfortunately were not given justice with respect to that particular massacre. The lynching of Matthew Williams. This is Matthew Williams, was a 23-year-old Black man who was lynched in Salisbury, Maryland. During the Great Depression, the violence against him and other Black laborers was a manifestation of white rage in response to economic anxieties. The case was investigated by the state's governor, but despite witnesses identifying law enforcement officers as ringleaders of the mob, no one was indicted. Right? So I just gave you 4 examples. Those are just 4 examples, 4 of many, many examples. But again, what is the connection between Trey Reed and these different examples that I gave you? These were successful Black men who were building businesses, entrepreneur, or at least, on the trajectory of being successful, economically prosperous, doing something for the community. And they were targeted specifically for that. And, I don't know about you, but many of us African Americans, like if you just talk to our ancestors, like my great aunt, she's 94. We had a family reunion last year. And, I sat down and talked to her, and she was telling me about my great grandfather, who evidently, I know this now, was a very successful, or I think it was actually, no, not my great great grandfather. Sorry. My 2 times great grandfather, who was a very successful businessman at his time. She was telling me, just the issues that he went through and how he was able to acquire a few hundred acres of land, but ended up losing it because of some legality things. And then, one of my uncles, I think, got into it with the Klan, and they ended up having to escape. And I mean, my family is partially in California because they ended up escaping due to a lot of the different racial injustice they're experiencing and being targeted because of some of the success they're starting to have in their farm, right? So like many Black folks, if you just sit and talk to your elders, of those who are still around, they will tell you of their own experiences, or they may tell you of their own stories where they've actually seen this stuff or been on the receiving end of this stuff, or escape some of this racial violence. So it's not like very far away. It's not like you have to go into the history books to see these things. All you got to do is talk to an elder. So again, what I'm trying to articulate is somebody like Trey Reed, he represents a long history of successful Black men, or men who are going down the line of success, being perceived as a threat. And the reason, the different reasons I gave you, the reason all of these guys were targeted was because they were at the epicenter. They were the leaders of what would be Black economic progress. And that can be seen as a threat to a system that relies upon the labor force. And I think there are elements of this that continue today, right? If you think of the 13th Amendment, we think of the prison industrial complex, if we think of many of the different things that are still very much powered by men, it's like, of course, there are Black families, individual Black families that can be successful, individual Black men. Even many of you guys who maybe are listening to me now, you might have experienced success in your own life, which is great. But what I'm trying to articulate, or what I'm starting to see, is like, again, this whole idea of, Black men haven't built stuff, Black men haven't built towns. Not only is it a lie, like it's ahistorical. And it is actually, in my opinion, it's highly disrespectful when you understand the way Black Americans have been systematically targeted. It's highly disrespectful to those who actually, were persecuted and suffered because of the progress they were trying to make. So although there are Black men who are doing well, we have to understand there have been systems, and there has been a concerted effort over the decades, obviously, to keep the community as a whole subjugated. And that cannot be overlooked. And that continues today. This is why we see the Trey Reeds. And, I would hope that this would stop, but this is why it's like every single year, I feel like there is some form of a lynching of a Black man, whether it be whether it be physically, whether through some, a police unaliving that goes viral, whether it be through his reputation, where, there's some Black man who's always, in the hall of shame, where his whole career is being torn down because of some alleged just wrongdoings. Whether it be through just a character assassination, like there's always a Black man, and from what I've noticed in media, there's always a Black man figured who is being lynched, physically, literally, socially, economically. Like there's just, in my opinion, there's this theme, and again, it goes back to like what I've come to see more and more. It's simple as a successful Black man, or successful Black men as a collective, being seen as a threat to a system that depends upon their subjugation. So that is what I believe someone like Trey Reed actually represents. Shout out to you guys again. I just want to acknowledge those cash apps for coming through. More to life. Thank you so much. Toward the goal. I appreciate you. Again, also appreciate it. Again, this is towards the goal. Thank you so much. And shout out to you, Saint Seer, in the goal. If you guys like what's going on here, like, share, subscribe. Also, you can hit me on Cash App or Venmo, Shay Sade. And again, I'm sharing information that many of you guys already know. If you're a Black man, you've pretty much figured this out by the time you were like 5. So this is not new information to you. But I think, especially as a Black woman, I find this information to be essential to our understanding. It's not just important that Black men understand or realize by the time they're 5 years old that they are seen as a threat, or that they're treated differently. I think it's equally as important for Black women to understand this as well. Now, what Black women, or just what Black people decide to do with this, that's a whole other conversation. But I think there needs to be a level of awareness. And I would say, as a Black woman, I can acknowledge as a Black woman that these are not the kind of conversations that we have. We're not told this. We're not told really that Black men are uniquely targeted in ways that are distinctive from Black women. We are never told that. We are never explained or shown how. That's never, ever addressed. Usually we're told that we're actually the most oppressed, and that we have, double minority status. And again, this is not about the oppression Olympics. I'm not here to try to argue that Black men are more oppressed than Black women, because that does nobody good. But I think it's important to understand the unique ways in which Black men experience the world, so that we can be more sensitive, or be more supportive when they're going through these things, or not be used as an attack dog against them, or make it seem like they're lying when they're actually experiencing things as Black women we may never understand. And so that's why I think these kind of conversations, while it's not, surprising to Black men, it's not anything new, it's particularly important for Black women to understand, if there is to be any meeting of the mind, or if there is to be any mutual understanding. And we're just simply not told this. So again, we talked, a little bit about Trey Reed and the whole recent situation. I gave you guys at least 4 examples. There's many more, but at least 4 examples of successful Black men being targeted because they were successful, and their targeting ended up in their unaliving. And now I want to point to some examples from Dr. T. Hasan Johnson, his book, which, by the way, if you guys haven't already got it, please do so. His book is phenomenal. And I want to just show you this section in the book where he talks about the impact of misandric policy. And I'm going to just briefly run through it. But again, the whole point of this particular section of the book is to articulate how policies have been used to create not only a wedge between Black men and Black women, but how these policies actually help to undermine the overall strength of the Black community, right? So if you look at this particular thing right here, it says the impact of misandric policies. He goes down to list multiple policies that actually created a chasm between Black men and Black women. It's one thing to say this, and it's one thing to articulate it, and oftentimes people can just kind of look the other way. But then when you see the amount of programs that were made readily available to women and women of color, including Black women, that were completely and totally unavailable to men, it is mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. Okay. So right here, it says the impact of misandric policy. It says, like several key policies, the man of the house rules played a significant role in breaking down the Black family, leading especially to the single-parent epidemic of female-headed households common in Black America starting in the 1970s. So again, the man of the house policy, that is basically saying that Black women were given access to resources as long as men were not around. And this is at the same time Black men were systematically being kept out of jobs. So I mean that was not by accident. And what that led to was, again, a rise of single parent households, and then over decades upon decades upon decades of fathers not being there and women having to be literally relying on the government. I mean, we have what we have today, which is entire generations of women who have said, well, we don't need men because they haven't been there. But we don't talk about the way that they were systematically pushed out, right? Anyways. Okay, so it says to reflect how policy has radically shifted the way Black women and men experience daily life in America, the following policies further split the Black gender experience. Poor Black women could more readily get access to Section 8, cash aid, tax credit, supplemental security, income, SSI, child support, transportation allotment, clothing allowances, diaper allowance, free childcare, free medical insurance, free gender-based mental health support, supplemental nutrition assistance program, SNAP, food stamps, the special supplemental food program for women, infants, and children, WIC, child nutrition program, subsidized housing, housing vouchers, public housing programs, medical insurance such as the Child Health Insurance Program, temporary assistance for needy families, no-cost internet through the Affordable Connectivity Program, the Earned Income Tax Credit, the Lifeline Program run by the Federal Communications Commission for discounted landline and cell phone service, federal public housing assistance, and the Low-Income Home Energy Program to defer utility bills continued. Furthermore, middle-class Black women have had greater access to kindergarten through high school college track curriculums. Free college tuition, financial aid, Pell Grants, college grants, childcare investment from private companies, and white-collar trade employments, e.g. Goldman Sachs' $10 billion investment in Black women's future employment, see 1 million Black women 2020, greater white-collar job access than Black men, 64% to 41% respectively, increased child support, percentage of greater income versus state distribution amounts, greater graduate school access, corporate internship programs, ability to run the office due to increased education, and small entrepreneurial support earmarked for Black women, especially during the pandemic. White and Black women benefit from reduced criminal sentencings by 63% compared to men who commit the same crimes. Note that the 63% was in relation to men in general. So Black and male criminal sentencing rates are worse for Black men. Y'all, that's just one section. That's just one section. He just mentioned like dozens upon dozens of programs and examples where there is a systematic disparity between the access that Black men have and the access that Black women have. And this is just, I mean, I haven't even read a whole page. I read 2 paragraphs from a page of this entire book. And again, what I'm trying to articulate, this is not about victim Olympics, and it's certainly not about, okay, who's more oppressed. But when we don't understand our own history and when we don't understand what's actually going on, it's very easy for us to be used as tools to undermine our own progress, to undermine our own communities, our own men, our own families. And I believe a lot of that is what's been going on. The things that I'm talking to you guys about are all things that you guys have known, again, since you were, if you're a Black man, you knew this stuff anecdotally, experientially by the time you were 5. You probably maybe didn't have the language or all of the historical understanding, but you knew intrinsically that you were treated differently. That experience, I don't think has been as aggressive for Black women by and large, unless maybe she was like really, really dark skinned or perceived as, plus size. I mean, there are some experiences I think where Black women are more aware, but by and large, Black women are not they're not seen as a threat in the way Black men are. And this is just one example. Like if we just look at the policies that have been made available and who actually has been given access to the policies, it's undeniable. I just read to you guys, not even a page of dozens of examples where Black women were given access to things that Black men were kept out of or not given access to. And of course that creates a disparity even between our own understanding, even between what Black men understand and what Black women understand. So again, going back to why I believe Black masculinity is seen as a threat. A group of empowered Black men is seen as a threat from a system who depends upon its subjugation. It's that simple. And we've seen this trend all throughout American history. And so often people will point to, they'll point to the examples of Black men who've made it out and say, no, that was in the past, or, oh, well, I did it. And, so you have to work hard. And that's not to say, of course, there are many Black men who have been able to have success and have been able to have, a good life in spite of all these things. But I'm talking about the community, the collective. I think we can all acknowledge that if you look at the collective, the community of Black America, there's a lot of room for improvement. And there's a lot of areas that are broken down. And what I'm saying is that much of that is systematic. We can't just blame it all on baby mamas who are creating multiple kids out of wedlock or Pookie and Ray Ray. Yeah, that's there. That definitely plays a role. But there's multiple components to consider. And one of them is the way in which Black men have been systematically targeted ongoingly. I just gave y'all countless examples of a disparity that is existed between men and women in barely one page. This book is this book has I think almost 200 pages, if not longer. So there are multiple examples, and I gave you plenty just within one page. So if you haven't already, be sure to check this out. Again, it's an amazing book by Dr. Hasan Johnson, Solutions for Anti-Black Misandry, Flat Blackness, and Black Male Death Unaliving. Definitely worth the read. But again, we're talking about the truth of why Black masculinity is feared. It's feared because an empowered Black man, an empowered Black men, an empowered Black community, again, is going to be seen as a threat to systems or a system that depends upon its subjugation. And we see examples. We've seen the ways in which this plays out and why there is an intended effort to keep that disparity active. In spite of the ability of some Black folks in order to, to move beyond, in spite of the ability of some Black folks to be able to thrive in the midst of it. That does happen. But we cannot overlook the collective effort there is to keep the community in its entirety in a particular position. Now, I want to turn your attention real briefly to this video that was sent to me earlier this week. I thought it was fascinating. It's just another angle on why Black masculinity is threatening and also attractive. And I just want to play it because it takes a whole other lens that I haven't really seen addressed before, but I think it rings true. So I'm just going to pull this up real quickly, and we're going to play some of it, and we'll go from there. Again, guys, for those of you here, like, share, subscribe if you like what's going on here. Thank you guys for bearing with me. This is super last minute. I have been wanting to talk about this for some time now. I just needed to find the right time. And I had some this evening. So I was like, well, why not do it while it's fresh off of my mind? Okay, so this one is called Why Black Masculinity is So Threatening and Attractive. And it says the evolved psychology of strong masculinity. I'm just going to play it because Yeah, I'm just going to play it and then we can.
There's studies that compare testicle size of different civilizations and different cultures.
So there's a lot of argument about this. And the problem is that the
It's racist.
It's racist, right? That's what underlies a lot of it, is that you end up with ethnic differences in testicle size, which we know exist. The ethnic differences in testicles, I believe, but I can't promise you that it's some different West African groups happen to have the largest testicle size on average. And so we have this idea of race as if it has genetic meaning, and it doesn't. But ethnicity does have genetic meaning, right? Mm-hmm. So an ethnic group evolved in a very certain spot to deal with very certain problems, and their body shape will vary. And you've got these West Africans who are really jacked with these big, a lot of quick jerk musculature. You don't see that over on East Africa very much.
I'm Chris Grandison. Welcome to my channel, Xegenesis.
Okay, real quick. So that video started with conversations around the black male phallus. Now that's a whole other topic. But there's obviously historically been a huge infatuation with the black male phallus. Oftentimes these lynchings, these public unalivings of black men, oftentimes they would be genitally mutilated. And there's a reason for that. So even their physicality, the physicality of black men itself is seen as a threat. And he's going to break down why. Okay, let's continue.
I apply evolutionary psychology to black community issues. Now, if you want to know why black men cannot be given social equality, then watch this video to the end so you get all the evidence. So in this video, I clipped some parts of a lecture I gave on this subject of the physical aspects of black masculinity that explains the evolutionary reasoning why we are on average perceived as threatening and more physically formidable. In fact, in evolutionary psychology, they would call it our response to testosterone-linked morphological traits. So this is like, how broad your shoulders are, how deep your voice is, how much upper body muscle you're carrying, even on the shape of your skull, how prominent are your brow ridges. Because we seem to be attuned and pay attention to these features of our body that show how strong or weak the action of testosterone has been on our development. So I want to show evidence of how this does affect the thoughts and behavior of people observing black men. And most importantly, the psychological machinery this engages in people's minds that contextually shapes their social responses to black men. Now, these clips will have studies included, and I'll put those studies in the description as well, so you can read this information firsthand for yourself.
Listen, if you've been in a car accident, don't call an attorney. Use this AI app instead. That's what I did, and that's how I got.
One of the strong findings across psychology now, this isn't just evolutionary psychology. This is lots of different forms of psychology. Find over and over again, black men are perceived as being more masculine. At that point, you can take the racial context and move it to the side and just say, how do human beings respond to higher levels of masculinity, whether it's within their own group or high, strong masculinity in members of out groups? How do human beings respond to that? How do they even perceive strong masculinity? So there's a perception of potential for aggression, violence, and physical dominance. So when they perceive that means there's a threat when it's in an in-group of being dominated by another group, because they're displaying this higher level of an ability to physically dominate. And for whatever reason, well, I do think I know the reasons, but it's a very strong finding that perceive black men as being more masculine. And when you add the cultural learning on top of that, so the ethnic stereotypes around black males as well, the two together, it just causes white male police officers to be quicker to want to use force against black men and to use a higher level of force against black men. And I found this across the United Kingdom and in the United States, multiple lines of evidence, whether it's psychological, whether it's something like here in this report from the Greater Manchester Police Achieving Race Equality report. When they talk about use of force on black men, this is what they kept finding in those reports from white officers, that they would talk about the physique of black men, and they're less likely to do that with any other kind of men, white men or whatever.
Let me say this too. So he's talking about, again, how obviously black men are treated from the police compared to other races, even compared to black women. It's completely different. Dr. Hasan Johnson, he's broken this down in his own material. So I don't think this is pretty much common knowledge, but let me talk anecdotally, even from my own life. I remember recently where I was, this was actually a few weeks ago. I was hanging out with my husband. We were at the beach and it was hot. So he had his shirt off. Not a big deal. That's what happens. And there were people who were commenting on his body, just randomly, white folks commenting on his body. I remember we were walking down one day to, I think, just on a hike, and this guy was like, "Wow, you're so ripped," And so I've even seen in my own life, like, and again, my husband, who's tall, dark skinned, or more muscular build, or just lean, he works out, and I can just see how in my own life there's these comments made about his body that are unprovoked. So this is why I'm saying, like, this stuff is not surprising at all. And I think as Black women, these are the things that we don't particularly think about all the time until we talk and listen to Black men, right? I'm talking about listen, because we always hear, okay, listen to Black women, but we're not always told, okay, well, are you listening to Black men too? But when you actually start to listen to Black men, hear about their experiences, or if you actually observe it, then it's undeniable. Then it's undeniable, and you start to recognize that you do not have the same experience as Black men. You just don't. Okay, let's continue.
Where there's a negative psychological response to, let's say, Black men or Black people from law enforcement. Now, one study that may support something like that is this 2010 study, where they found white perceivers for whom self-protection goals are highly salient. And of course, that's going to be the case with police officers. They erroneously see anger, but not other negative emotions in the neutrally expressive faces of Black men. So they're not expressing any anger, but the white perceivers whose self-protection goals are salient, they are seeing anger in that face. But in the same research, they're not seeing that in the faces of white men or women, or the faces of even Black women. So it wasn't just straight up racial. Now, this would take us back to the first lecture with the race as a social construct. And I talked about testosterone morphologically linked traits and how we respond to strong masculinity, what we associate with it. This reaction would fit right in with that kind of research. But a negative psychological response from police officers to Black men is going to mean, I'm going to be more likely to pull you over. I'm going to be more likely to want to search you. I'm going to be more likely to suspect you of something. And once you have that, once they're now stopping you, now it's just mathematics. I'm more likely to find something wrong if I'm more likely to stop and search you at a high level compared to other groups of people. And that leads to high levels of criminalization.
Now, this view of Black people being more masculine and formidable, it's not a Western thing. It's not just based on stereotypes that exist in Western civilization. It is global. And you can see in these two clips that I've got for you.
外国人の羨ましいところとか、外国の羨ましいところだったりします。
なんか骨格がしっかりしてて、僕も筋トレしてるんですけど、筋肉つきやすそうで羨ましいなと思って。
特に多分黒人の方は、そうですね。
腕とか。
觉得美国人啊，就是身体的那种结构比较好，像那种黑人呐、那种人高的人，肌肉都很好，所以。
That was an elite Chinese gymnast in 2015 giving an interview to The Economist. And, he stated the Americans have better physicality, especially the Black athletes who are taller and more muscular. That is a clear example of a perception of higher physical masculinity in Black males. This is
so again, what he's outlining is that Black men, just by nature of them being Black, are just perceived physically to be more masculine. And by masculine, stronger, more physically, astute, just overall more of a threat. That's essentially what he's outlining. And he was like, this doesn't just exist in the West, it doesn't just exist in America or Europe, UK. These perceptions are actually global. So that's basically what he's outlining.
Common in East Asia. I lived in East Asia for about 3 years, and they will tell you openly how they feel about Black people. And a lot of it is just about how physically robust and strong they perceive us to be. Yeah. A few weeks back, I made that video based on what Jeff St. James of the Ask a Brother podcast stated about the global racial desirability rankings, where white men were at the top, Black men second, Latino men third, and Asian men fourth. And then on the women's side, it was either white or Asian women on the top, Latino women with Black women on the bottom. Mm-hmm. And I stated, what we found in many studies, psychologist Dr. Philip Atiba Goff, he's a Black psychologist in America who does a lot of work with police departments on excessive use of force on Black people. And in a 2008 study, he and his colleagues stated perceivers held a strong association between Blackness and masculinity.
So, this is going to be a whole nother conversation because what he mentioned in there, I'm not sure exactly of the study, but he talked about there was a study that basically showed, attractiveness, white men obviously being at the top of the hierarchy, and then Black men were second to that. And he's going to explain why. But what was interesting, when he talked about the women, Black women were at the bottom of that, right? So again, if Blackness is perceived as masculinity, that might have some appeal or some attractiveness to Black men, but when it comes to Black women being perceived as more masculine, that's obviously going to not work in their favor. So this is a whole different conversation of, okay, so what does Blackness mean for Black women as far as being more masculine? And then I saw one of the comments in here talk about these videos of Black women actively being aggressive and violent certainly isn't helping when it comes to the selective mating. It's not helping when it comes to them being seen as attractive or feminine beings. So again, that's a whole other conversation, but nevertheless, he's outlining how Blackness itself is generally perceived with more masculinity, with a higher form of masculinity. And I would argue that this also translates into Black women as well. Really interesting stuff. Okay, let's continue. Okay, let's continue.
Based on that, several people have wanted to know, well, okay, why are we perceived as more masculine? I never really answered that question. To be honest, I didn't really want to, because you're not going to like those answers. I don't like those answers, but I'm going to answer it because you should know it does play a significant role in how Black people perceived and how people interact with us. Because you have to think, what does masculinity, particularly higher average levels of masculinity, represent to the human mind? How do our brains process strong masculinity? This isn't really about being Black. This is about what human beings have done with strong masculinity over time. They've used it to boss shit and take shit and dominate shit and conquer shit. And if they're perceiving us from a physical point of view of being more masculine, then there's always going to be that concern, that fear around Black masculinity. Now, the clip that started this video, that was evolutionary psychologist William von Hippel on the Joe Rogan podcast some years back, speaking about differences in physical masculinity between ethnic groups. That's one of the examples of how there can be significant difference, physically speaking, in things associated with masculinity.
What William von Hippel was talking about is related to this. There are ethnic differences in sensitivity to testosterone, which is linked to morphological features. And so because they differ by ethnicity, you can have more pronounced, physical features of masculinity between populations, producing, some of what he was talking about. So he talked about how the West African guys would be bigger in comparison to some of the East African guys. Now, because testosterone sensitivity differs between ethnic groups, I just want to take a second to explain it. So what you're looking at here are these CAG repeat numbers. The lower the number, the more sensitive your body is to testosterone. And these are averages by population. So I put WA in front of black to show that these are the tests have been done on West African blacks mainly, or West African descended blacks, I should say. And then you see the white average is 21 and the Asian average is 23. So the lower the number, the more efficient and sensitive your body is to processing testosterone, producing these effects of masculinization. And this is just a bit of support for that. So you see the AR there is the androgen receptor, and the CAG is showing the number of repeats. So again, the lower the number, the more sensitive the body is to testosterone. So in this study here done in 2012, you'll see that Afro-Caribbeans had the shortest number, Caucasian and Hispanics a bit higher, and then East Asians were the highest.
Now to support what you just saw in that clip, I'm going to give you some evidence from the Center for Disease Control. They stated, in general, across nationally representative and convenient samples, black adults are more muscular and stronger than whites, who are more muscular and stronger than Asians.
Now, so again, he's outlining how physically, basically, black folks physically tend to be stronger. I think it's basically saying have more muscle mass, things of that nature. Now, I am curious about the sample size because we also understand, at least right now in America, black women are the most obese, which arguably means they probably have, their, what do they call it? Their muscle mass is, I would assume, would be lesser than those of other races who are of a more healthier size. So I'm curious about the sample size. I'm curious about the years around it. But by and large, if you acknowledge that, or we understand that black folks were generally, they were the labor force for a good portion of American history, for the majority of American history, and are responsible for the systems, like as far as just manning, like they're responsible for that. It's not surprising to note that black folks were physically stronger. Like they were on plantations, they were building things, they were sharecropping. Even if I think of like people in my own family, like my grandpa, he was a farmer boy, country boy. He was strong as an ox. They used to, in my family, they would make jokes about how in my 60s, my grandpa he was stronger than all my uncles. They were at the gym in their 20s at the gym, lifting weights and getting swole. And even with all that, they could not beat my grandpa, who was just strong, grew up in the country. I had one of my other uncles, he could physically lift a car with his bare hands. He was so strong. He could physically lift a car with his bare hands, just super strong. But you're talking, country folk, old country folk who were literally the labor force. Even past, slavery, past, the slave trade and the illegal slave trade, obviously, and then going into sharecropping when they were still largely manning. It's not surprising that they were the strongest. So, yeah, so I could see how he was saying that. I did have some questions or speculations as to what does that mean for today, particularly when we understand that black women are the most obese and overweight compared to other women. But I think he's trying to make a general point about how blackness is perceived, and then also historically the implications behind that, and how that's generally been seen as true. Okay, let's continue. Let's continue.
That's not stereotype. That's not social construction. That's hard evidence. So that's a clear statement from them. Blacks have a higher level of maleness. And again, this is from the CDC. This is not, from some Mickey Mouse outfit. Mm-hmm. And this starts in utero. Black babies are exposed to high levels of testosterone in utero.
Interesting.
Many of you already know something about the relationship between black males and testosterone. But what I will present here is the evolutionary psychology behind the human brain's processing of information related to physical masculinity. Meaning, how do we respond to these testosterone-linked morphological features of the human body? Because our brain pays strong attention to these features.
Did you know that 95% of girls in the most disadvantaged communities in rural Africa?
Masculine faces, meaning faces that show testosterone-linked morphological features, like prominent brow ridges and being short and broad. Cross-culturally, they're perceived as belonging to people you do not want to mess with. These masculinity cues represent the potential for various forms of dominance, violent social competition, and threats to the status of rivals and the ability to acquire and control resources. Collectively, These masculinity cues are perceived as threat-provoking physical features, as you see listed here, and they are indicators of the formidability of the male. That's what they look like to the human brain. And one of the top evolutionary researchers on formidability is evolutionary psychologist Aaron Sell. And in his 2009 paper, along with his colleagues Lida Cosmides and John Tooby, he stated, one of the key variables governing social interactions in species like humans should be formidability. It is increasingly looking like deep male voices weren't really about attracting women. It was much more about intimidating men to outcompete them for the women. Deep voices are one of the main testosterone-linked features that our psychology tends to note and respond to. And researchers found that people can estimate the physical formidability of a man just by listening to his voice over the phone. A deep voice is a strong indicator of the threat potential of a male.
So let me list what goes along with having higher levels of physical masculinity. It gives men a social presence. Let's call that, social dominance. People are attuned and pay a bit more attention to socially dominant men. It gives them a greater ability to compete with other men, meaning their intersexual competitiveness is going to perceive to be stronger, and it tends to be stronger because how the human brain responds to strong masculinity. Also, those types of men can be more confrontative. Confrontative men tend to be attractive to women because they see those men being confrontational with other men as an aspect of being this socially dominant, superior man. And if that man is tied to them, then he can dominate others on their behalf. And this is why they find that attractive. Now, with regard to physical attractiveness, strong masculinity is perceived as offering genetic benefits to women, as in if they choose to reproduce with a man like that, then they're going to have strong, healthy children. Now, when masculine men are members of outgroups, which black men are, many non-black women will not see them as attractive. They will see them as dangerous. So do you really want to give social equality to a group of men with those traits? You can't restrict them genetically or biologically, but socioeconomically, you can hold down a group of men like that.
So again, the argument is there's plenty of evidence to show that black men, by and large, not only are they perceived as being physically stronger and more masculine, there's scientific evidence to suggest that, right? So he's going on to say, okay, so if we can agree, and if there is a consistent consensus or a belief globally that black men are masculine, are more stronger physically, why would you then want to give them an equal playing field in the economy or socially? If they already have this physical advantage, then why would you want to give them equal opportunity in these other areas? You wouldn't want to do that. Like, if you perceive them as a threat, you're going to want to disempower them in these other areas because you are always going to have this fear that they will be able to overpower you. So to try to mitigate the advantage that they may have physically, you may try to disempower them socially or economically, right? This is what he's going to go on to argue. Okay, let's see. Again, guys, if you're here, like, share, subscribe, show support on Cash App or Venmo if you'd like to do so. And actually, let me go on a quick little break. I'm going to go on a quick break and then we can continue. Okay. So let's continue. Let's continue with this. And I think we're
when asked to categorize voice recordings with a high degree of masculinity, the deeper the voice was, the more likely white participants were to perceive those voices as coming from black men. And furthermore, they had another part of the study. They had the men would wear these bodysuits, and there would be sensors on the bodysuits, and then they would track them walking. So what they would do is computerize that and show the participants of the study the figures walking, but as points of light. So you can't tell anyone's race. You can just tell it's a human figure walking, and you're looking at points of light. It's like that body capture stuff they do for science fiction movies like Avatar and so on. So the more masculine the style of walking was, the more likely they also were to perceive that walker as being a black male. So what you're really looking at here is the perception of strong masculinity is being more associated with black people and black males in particular.
Yeah.
So if I pause for a second, now how quickly did it take for you to perceive one dog as a lot more physically formidable than the other one? If you were to walk into a park, and see these two dogs off the leash, which one would you immediately be much more concerned about? It would be the Rottweiler there, because you can see it's a much more formidable dog, and you might know the dog that it has a fierce reputation. So you have, what you physically perceive mixing with reputation and cultural perceptions of both of these dogs. Well, humans don't just do this with dogs, we do this with each other. So we perceive humans as being more or less or formidable, not just individually, but also in our social groupings, and certainly by ethnic group. So one of the ways we've been finding this out is by using what this young man is wearing on his head. These glasses are eye tracking software, and when you're wearing it, it tracks what people look at when they initially meet you, what parts of their body they seem to selectively pay attention to. And in men, we found that they selectively pay attention to testosterone-linked morphological traits. So they'll look at how wide your shoulders are, upper body muscle around your chest area. And we found that they do this automatically, pretty much always. Now, women can do it, but they don't do it as much as men do. Men tend to do it because men compete against each other. And because women don't really compete against men, they don't do it as much. A lot of the women will look in a man's eyes as opposed to this formidable area of the upper body. However, in the test, when they are actually asking men and women to compare, different men with different sizes and so forth, both the men and the women are very accurate at estimating like the strength of that male, how formidable he appears to be. But it's kind of odd because when they ask men and women to do this with women, they're not very good at estimating the strength of women. So the reason that women don't tend to be good at assessing it of other women is because really men have been the violent, aggressive problem women have had to face throughout our evolution. There isn't a long history of women forming large groups and fighting and killing each other, but men just kill everybody. They kill other men, they kill women. So women have actually had to be really good at estimating the strength of males as well. But the fact that we do this automatically, very quickly, and then we use this as social information that influences our behavior, and this is based on also on ethnic differences between groups. So this was an article written by an Asian researcher about 10 years ago on ethnic differences of testosterone in men. I wanted to use some of the social information he gave us because he kind of backs up what we've seen in the science studies. So his comment here, if you live in a diverse country, you've probably noticed these variations in body structure between ethnic groups. And then he goes on to say, stating his observations bluntly, Black people on average seem to be more muscular than the norm, while Asians are less muscular than the norm. And by their absence, he's saying white guys are like the norm, they're in the middle, which would line up with the studies on differences in testosterone sensitivity by ethnic group. Now, what he said here is, an assessment of these different groups by, their physical prowess. So I wanted to show how socially we all notice these things, but as Carol Hooven put in her book here, it does affect the social environment because possessing these physical traits, either to less or a more pronounced degree, it profoundly affects social interactions. And we see this here again. This was a private conversation that was recorded from the French national team coach about 10 years ago. So he was concerned about.
So again, he's just giving countless examples of not only how Black masculinity is perceived, or just how Blackness is perceived globally, and how generally Black men will be perceived as the most masculine and having had the biggest physical advantage. And then he uses examples. I see a comment in there about the Rottweiler versus the lab. He's using that example just to show how immediately humans are going to have, we have the tendency to judge just off of physical perception. He was using dogs as an example, but he says that translates into humans, and he goes on to talk about how men are generally always sizing each other up. That's kind of what the test he was alluding to was showing. He was like, men tend to just naturally always be sizing other men up as far as just getting a sense of, okay, is this man potentially a threat? Is he not a threat? At some point in the video, I don't know if he's going to see it, but at some point in the video, he talks about, I think he says like the blindness that actually Black folks have to other cultures because Black people, particularly Black men, are always considered to be the threat, or always considered to be the most masculine, the most physically demanding. It's rare that Black men will walk into an environment and feel like they themselves are, that they can be physically overpowered, or that they can be physically, like, that's not, I mean, he goes, I don't know if he's going to, if we're going to get to it, but he kind of talks about this idea of maybe Black men being, maybe not having the fear that some of these other cultures will have as far as being physically overpowered. So that could be an area of blindness there. And then this example he gives, it's basically just coaches who talk about how they're upset that all the players in there who are overpowering, European players, white European players, are Black. But those are the ones who are doing well, right? So he gives that example of how, you have these Black people in sports who are overpowering these other cultures because of their genetic benefits. And how there's been, historically, there's been a lot of folks who are upset at that. But like, you can't control if you have a genetic benefit. Like, you can't. Okay, let's move on a little bit. Oops. All right, guys. I can't control the ads. Okay.
He's perceiving these young Black men as competition when they're actually on his team. And if we're being perceived more physically formidable, then what does that do with regard to the psychological machinery that you will engage in? If you're perceiving us as competition and you're perceiving us as more physical, more powerful than you are.
I call this a Black blind spot because we don't tend to see other races as being physically intimidating. As the evidence is shown above, that's not the way other races see us. And as a consequence, we don't fully understand their reactions to our physiology because we don't feel and experience the same reaction to their physiology as they do toward ours.
Now, does this really seem like a population of men you want to go head up against for the championship? You don't want that smoke, man. So what you want to do is restrict a population of men who possess this high level of physical masculinity. Now, there's nothing you can do about Black biology. You can't hold down the physical masculinity of Black men, the higher average levels of that physical masculinity. So what you want to do is hold them down socially. You want to attack their status. You want to restrict them educationally. You want to restrict them in the labor market. You want to restrict them anywhere you can socially and economically. And that's exactly how you do it. You restrict their economic attractiveness. You want to make sure that there's stigma and poor reputations on them as a group, because if you match how masculine they're perceived to be with a good social reputation, that's a group of men who are going to outcompete you.
Yeah.
They will have the ability in intersexual competition to win, because masculinity comes with all kinds of benefits. The adaptive option would be to deny these rivals social equality and maintain the edge your tribe has over them. But now, how do they restrict this population of Black men in the modern world? Well, some evolutionary psychologists have written about this. You want to keep their socioeconomic position lower. And evolutionary scientists call this form of male intersexual competitiveness, of using human institutions this way, structural violence. This clip shows how structural violence is being used against Black men right now in the modern world.
I think racial mass incarceration was what we would call in evolutionary studies an adaptive countermeasure. What Jim Crow did is lock the Black population into an inferior position by law and social practices. Now, with that gone, you need another dominant strategy. How am I going to lock them into a lower social ranking without the overt official system we had? And racial mass incarceration was better than the previous strategy. It's beautiful. It's elegant in how it operates. In evolution, we have this term called a cost-inflicting strategy. And this is a behavioral strategy practiced by organisms towards other members of its own species to restrict and harm the ability of their competitors to challenge them. And humans pursue these strategies naturally. And when I say naturally, I mean they'll do it unconsciously and consciously. It's a cost-inflicting strategy. It's something you do to your rival to restrict their ability to challenge you for this thing you're both trying to get. Now, this is species-typical behavior. You will see this amongst ethnic groups of the same race in other parts of the globe, in Asia or Africa and so on. You will see the same behavior pattern. But this is exactly what he was talking about. A coalitional situation where it seems advantageous to try and keep members of other groups in a lower status position with distinctly worse outcomes. Now, I'm not the only evolutionist to notice this. You see Jim Sedanis' work there, and Sapolsky and Pascal Boyer. And we're going to finish this up by looking at this study from Rauch and Hopcraft. So this is a quote from their study. Prison is, needless to say, an effective way of removing them, meaning Black men, from the mating arena. It's also a way of permanently reducing their attractiveness as mates, because ex-convicts are severely compromised in terms of their ability to garner the resources necessary to provide for their mates and offspring. When men compete against each other, it's their status they tend to want to go after to restrict and reduce them. Well, dominant group males are able to create coalitions, utilize cultural scripts and social institutions in ways that tilt the competition in their favor. So that's what I've got highlighted in there: the structural power, political, legal, economic, all resting on a cultural dominance foundation. So they've got the power to do that to the outgroups who they feel threatened by.
So again, he's just outlining basically how, again, physical threat or just Blackness, Black masculinity globally is going to be seen as the top tier. And then there's scientific evidence to suggest that, yeah, Black men by and large tend to be just physically stronger with other races. That's not, a stereotype. It's just more scientifically that's been proven. Now, what would that mean in a society or an area where Black men who are physically stronger, perceived as physically stronger than other races? What would that mean if they were given equal access or equal opportunity to other races? Many would argue that, that they are likely to be able to outcompete if they're given equal access, educationally, socially, culturally, whatever. So in order to keep them subjugated, right, you have to basically create systems or do things to not give them the same social, economic, and political access that other races have to mitigate the threat of them outcompeting you. Again, that's the argument. That is the argument. And I think it's pretty consistent. That goes back to what I've said before on why I believe an empowered Black man or empowered Black men would actually be seen as a threat who depends upon their subjugation in order to thrive. Now, this isn't, I don't believe it has to be this way. I don't believe this inherently, this is a natural system that's going on right now. But I think when we understand the way these things work, and I think when we understand these different idiosyncrasies, and then, he's giving examples, I gave examples from the book from Dr. Hasan Johnson, and I'm sure every last one of you guys who is listening knows anecdotally in your own life examples. It's obvious that Black men are uniquely targeted. And that was my whole point of talking about this. It's not necessarily about victim Olympics or trying to see who's more oppressed or less oppressed or whatever, but it's more about just understanding how uniquely different the Black male experience is from Black women. And at least I think just having more understanding of that. Because I think Black women are not, again, we're not told these things. We don't talk about these things. We're not taught these things. We're actually, I would argue, blind to the unique way that Black men experience challenges. I believe we're blind to that. And so I think that having just a general understanding of that would be a lot more helpful. Okay, so I'm almost done. or this one is almost done, and then I'm going to wrap this up.
So this human behavior pattern creates inequality between groups by evolved design. We have evolved to be effective competitors by promoting our own fortunes and by undermining the fortunes of our rivals.
Now, if I put this in the scientific language of evolutionary psychology, from two of the grandmasters and founders of evolutionary psychology, Martin Daly and Margot Wilson, in their classic book called Sex, Evolution, and Behavior, they stated, top males keep other males down, underdeveloped, out of circulation, and out of the breeding population. Now, across the animal world, it is a common phenomenon for top males to work to keep other males of their species down as a useful sexual strategy to outcompete them. Humans are not excluded from this practice. We do it, we do it everywhere. If you are the dominant race, but you feel this way about the subordinate race, how hard are you going to try to give them social equality and remove a big advantage you have over them? If you give this rival tribe social equality, their physical advantages create an unequal situation between you. Your tribe now no longer has a social advantage over them because their physical abilities have a positive influence on how people are perceived and treated socially. So if there's no stigma, if there's no negative stereotypes on Black men, and now they have a great social reputation, along with being perceived as being more strongly physically masculine, well, that will bestow upon them what big white guys have. Big white guys are perceived not as a threat, they're perceived as having status, perceived as being leaders, and so on. So they would be creating an unequal situation between us because the whole world perceives us as already having higher levels of masculinity. So when you add social equality, socially equal, but physically not perceived as being equal. So logically speaking, the evolutionary reasoning would say, these Black guys now, they're going to have the selective social advantage over white men and the selective sexual advantage over white men. So, be honest, what group of men, regardless of white men, no group of men, Black men, white men, Asian, Latino men, no group of men wants to give the other team an advantage over them with regard to status and being perceived as attractive. That's just not going to happen. Top males keep other males down. And modern day structural violence is how the population of men with structural and institutional power, that's how they do it. If they didn't, they would be giving up not just a selective social advantage, but a selective sexual advantage. What group of men want to give up social and sexual advantages to the other team? So I'm going to let Brother Muzone, from my favorite TV drama, The Wire, I'm going to let him explain what this situation really is.
Okay, so I thought this breakdown was really, really, really fascinating. He provided countless evidence, just historically, scientifically, and gave different quotes. You guys go ahead and check out the video if you want. I'll be sure to link it in the description. But yeah, I thought it was just a different angle that I hadn't really thought about. But yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. If Black men are physically perceived as a threat and there's a fear that they have, then you're not going to want to give them an advantage by giving them equal opportunity. If you perceive them as your nemesis or as your threat, you're going to do whatever you can systematically to try to oppress them, particularly if you don't see them as being on the same team. And that's basically what his argument is. And lastly, what I think I would say a racist regime, a racist system would fear is ultimately this, right? Whether you agree or disagree with the Hell State Alliance and how it's being ran and Ibrahim Traoré and all of that, because I know he's getting a lot of traction. This is ultimately what I believe a racist white power structure fears, specifically because, again, if a system depends upon the subjugation of Black people or Black nations or Black communities in order to thrive, they're not going to want them to be able to have their own power and sovereignty. I mean, we're seeing just in a few years, as Burkina Faso, for example, as these countries, as they are starting to kick colonial powers out, imperialisms out, or how they are starting to put more boundaries around those relationships, how that's physically, or that is like economically and socially impacting these nations. Like France right now is on life support. They're experiencing a lot of economic challenges, and it is directly connected to the colonial relationships they have with these particular nations. So this is, in my opinion, is exactly what they fear, is Black men who are in control at the head of their own communities and who are doing things that put their communities first. That's what I really believe is at the forefront of this. And this is exactly why, if my thumbnail, we had, the Trey Reed, and then we have the Ibrahim Traoré, because I think they would represent what would be, what would a empowered Black men or Black men look like, Black men who are leading their nations, right? Or who are on that, in that trajectory. And again, I understand there's a lot of controversy around the Sahel States Alliance. Not everyone's in agreement with it. Not everyone is in agreement with just how are they moving and all of that. And so, like I said, that's another conversation for another day. But I'm just trying to illustrate the point of why I believe a lot of this just goes down to competition of money, of resources, competition of access. And again, if your system is largely built upon the subjugation of Black bodies, of Black men, of Black peoples, then you're not going to want to empower them, because to do so would basically usurp the system that you have. And we understand the global economy was literally built off of chattel slavery. It was built off of that. Like the current economic system we have going on now, it was built off of that. So we can't be blind to what that has meant and what that even means today. So that's what I think is really going on here. And I think, again, as Black women, it's important for us to understand the unique ways in which Black men are targeted and why. Now, what you decide to do with that information is, that's up to, the individual and their communities and how they decide to move. But I think it's just important to understand that Black men do experience, not only do they experience the world differently because of the way that they're perceived, that there's actually been policy to help create that chasm and that divide. And I just think it's important for Black women to understand that, so they're not confused. They themselves can't be, fed propaganda, and they're not used against their men to create a divide and a wedge. So anyways, guys, that is what I have. What do you guys think about this whole thing? Let me know down in the comment section. Again, if you like this stream, be sure to like, share, subscribe, pass it along. And also, if you can show support to the show, you can, become a channel member, or you can also just hit me up on Cash App or Venmo. And also, if you haven't already, be sure to grab your copy of It Is Not Jermaine's Fault. That is a book where I talk specifically about the experience that Black men have in education. And as I mentioned before, how their experience in education is unlike Black women, and unlike what many other people experience. So if you have not already, be sure to check that book out. It's Not Jermaine's Fault. It is available now. And there's also shirts. If you don't want the book, you can also just get your shirt. It's Not Jermaine's Fault. Or I have different versions of it. I also have, versions in different colors. And I also have sweatshirts, all that kind of different stuff. So check it out if you haven't already done so. Like, share, subscribe. Let me know what you think down in the comment section. And thank you so much for listening, guys. And that's what I got for today. Thank you guys also for joining me. This was, again, super last minute. I've been wanting to cover this all week. I've just had family come out of town last minute, which was great, but that just, changed my schedule a bit. And then I, had some last minute, all good stuff. It's just my schedule was kind of off. So that's why I'm doing this live at a time that I normally don't do it, in a day that I normally don't work. But I just wanted to get this stuff off my chest while it was, fresh. So thank you guys. We will talk later. Okay. Bye.
It's a nightfall, let the whole world see. Black kings rising high in our own destiny. Moving through the storm, proud and bold we stand. Shining like gold, love's in command.
Misandry tried to put him down with a misandry vibe, but Jermaine flipped the script.